Mysterious Tongren, unforgettable Taoist. Are you another mysterious Tongren? I want to watch the protagonist play with Xiao Ku, such as telling him that I believe in the primordial heavenly sovereign Jiu Xuanzuan. You can add tags to give more help to Western France from the existence of high-level grids, such as Mother Gods, Cassava, and so on. Withering Star Marks. I want to see a witch. BSTBB. It suddenly occurred to me that in the field of war, if the protagonist becomes a god in the future, wouldn't his title be able to have a Lord of Armies? Looking at the comments from these readers in the Book of Mysteries, Shifa only has one idea. Author, you must not be a eunuch. Book Friend Group. 570917823 Keywords of the novel. I am in the main game of mystery, breaking the dimensional wall without pop-ups. I am downloading the complete set of TXT in the main game of mystery, and reading the latest chapter in the main game of mystery, breaking the dimensional wall. Chapter 1. The Beginning of Hell. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. The beginning of hell. The clattering sound of water seemed to come from a distance, causing Lee Jersey's eyelids to twitch slightly, and his consciousness to struggle like a rusty machine. Is the water in the bathroom not turned off? No, I have to get up and give instructions to Lee Jersey, trying my best to concentrate and gradually open my eyes. In his blurred vision, he vaguely saw the wooden ceiling and saw a peaceful blush. Lee Jersey's mind was numb and he didn't feel anything unusual. He instinctively looked around. He found that it was not a spacious room, with beds, tables, and cabinets arranged. A copper mirror hung on the wooden wall, reflecting the night sky with a red crescent hanging outside the window. And a person sitting on the bed, leaning against the wall. The person hung their head, with a bullet hole in their eyebrows and blood stains all over their face. Amidst the crimson splashes outside the window, they looked particularly ferocious. Dead people. Lee Jersey gave a wake-up call and woke up completely. He only then realized that the colors in the room were particularly rich, and the scene in his field of vision was like a brightly colored oil painting. Right in front of me, the dancing dust froze, and an unknown flying insect froze in mid-air, as if time had been pressed to stop. Later, Lee Jersey noticed that he was holding a thick classic book in his hand. It is filled with an indescribable sense of illusion, with various colored glimmers floating around the edges. On the dark-colored cover, there is a strange pattern. That is an eye with an equilateral triangle pattern in its pupils. Around the eyes, there are 7 symbols distributed. Strangely, Lee Jersey couldn't see the 7 symbols clearly, as if they were shrouded in a mist, vaguely visible and not very clear. Below this eye pattern, there is also some information. Knowledge Permissions. Point 9. At this point, the cover opened on its own, revealing a slightly yellowish paper inside. On the blank page, there was the word bookmark on the first line, which I didn't know what it meant. With the blink of an eye, this strange classic gradually faded away until it disappeared into Lee Jersey's eyes, as if what he had just seen was all an illusion. As the classics disappear, the light and color in the room also begin to return to normal. Li Jia remembered the body on the bed and suddenly stood up, feeling a slight drop on his shoulder, followed by the sound of heavy objects falling to the ground. He followed the sound and saw a person dressed as a sailor lying on the ground. Under the sailor's body, a silent stream of blood flowed. Another dead person. What's going on here? He looked around in terror and confirmed that this was not his rented house. The sound of splashing water outside the window, coupled with the gentle shaking of the floor, was like being on a boat. Unintentionally, Lee Jersey scanned the bronze mirror on the wall and saw a strange figure. At around the age of 17 or 8, he has short black hair, dark blue eyes, slightly white skin, and a faint scar below his left eye, resembling tears. He has a slender figure and is wearing a blood-stained black formal dress. His shirt collar is crooked, and the buttons are missing. Who is this? A crazy idea surged in Lee Jersey's heart. He tried to raise his hand, and the unfamiliar young man in the mirror made a corresponding action. Buzz. Lee Jersey stood back in disbelief, and a clear thought gradually emerged from his panicked thoughts. Is the person in the mirror me? Have I traveled through time? Suddenly, he felt something being kicked at his feet. He looked down and saw a beautifully designed revolver lying on the ground beside his feet. Its barrel and body were decorated with patterns resembling snake scales. Lee Jersey picked up the revolver, shook open the magazine, and found that there were 2 missing bullets inside. It goes without saying where they went. It is obvious that these 2 missing bullets created the murder in the room. Who killed these 2 people? Can't it be me? As if stimulated by this thought, suddenly, some images flashed back in my mind. Lee Jersey saw himself wrestling with 2 people, one resembling a passenger on a ship and the other a sailor. They crashed into this room, kicked the passenger away with 1 foot, and took the opportunity to lift the left gun decorated with snake scales, shooting with precision, putting the other person into eternal slumber. The remaining sailors rushed forward frantically, stabbing the dagger in his left rib in exchange for a blow from the left wheel against his chin. Nausea. Lee Jersey suddenly felt a wave of turbulence in his stomach, leaning against the wall and retching, but he didn't vomit anything. He lifted his clothes again and indeed saw a wound on his left rib. However, the flesh and blood at the wound site are wriggling, the wound has closed and is recovering. This relieved Lee Jersey. However, it's good that the wound is recovering, but the murder in this room, sure enough, I am the culprit. Thinking of this, Lee Jersey couldn't help but smile bitterly. As a patriotic young man who grew up under the red flag, Lee Jersey not only killed people, but also chickens. Suddenly realizing that he had killed someone, I couldn't help but feel anxious and inexplicable. Moreover, as these memory fragments flashed back, the memories belonging to the original owner also appeared in his mind bit by bit. Shifa Disraeli, from the town of Enki in the county of Dish in the kingdom of North Continental Wayne. My father is Baron Bison Disraeli, who owns a manor, a lumberyard, a textile factory, and a large piece of land in the town of Enki. He is a well-known aristocrat in Enki, and every year he donates to the Night Goddess Church in the town for charitable purposes. Mother Anilu is a gentle woman who always gives affirmation and support to her children. In addition, family members also have a younger sister and a younger brother. Originally, with such conditions, according to Lee Jersey's idea, the original owner should have become a capable, ambitious, and noble young man who strives for the welfare of the lower-class people. Unfortunately, the opposite is true. The original owner had a bad reputation in Enki town, oppressed the poor, acted recklessly, and had an unhealthy lifestyle. This time, he caused trouble to his own personal maid. Under public pressure, his father, Bid Sun, kicked him out of the house and went to talk about a few business deals. He first went to Zibalang and stayed there for almost a month. Continuing to board the Alfalfa, heading towards the port of Enmat, this Lee Jersey suddenly had an impulse to reopen. Isn't this a proper template for aristocratic villains, the original owner? This kind of person is just an experience package for the protagonist to boost their reputation. I did something wrong to cross over to this type of person. Lee Jersey wanted to cry without tears, but memories flashed back and continued in his mind. Just 5 days after leaving Port Caesar, the Alfalfa encountered pirates. The Nast group, known as the King of the Five Seas, looted the ship, but fortunately the other party only took the money and did not kill the prisoners. However, misfortune never comes alone. Shortly after the pirates left, there was a fierce internal conflict between the passengers and crew of the Alfalfa. At first it was just a dispute, but soon it escalated into a brawl, followed by a battle between a revolver and a straight sword. In those days of mutual slaughter, the people on the ship fell one after another, blood stained the deck, and despair spread on the ship. Fortunately, the captain led some people, including the original owner, who had not yet lost their rationality, to hide at the lower level. They hid in the lower levels for nearly a week, reaching the limits of those crazy guys on the ship, preparing to launch an attack tonight and seize the ship. Due to the fact that the original owner was one of the few people with guns, he was sent out to scout the enemy situation. However, before reaching the upper deck, he was discovered by the two deceased individuals, leading to a fierce but brief battle. The memory fragments finally faded away, and Lee Jersey recalled this information and extracted some key words from it. Nast, the king of the 5 seas. I haven't heard of it. However, the Night Goddess Church in Desi County, Kingdom of Wayne, seems to have been seen somewhere before. Wait a minute. Lee Jersey quickly covered his mouth, causing the exclamation that came to his mouth to fail. He suddenly felt weak and almost fell down. He knows what world he has traveled to. The Lord of Secrets. That is a well-known novel both domestically and internationally. He has been accepted by his friends countless times and is currently reading it. Despite reading less than 50 chapters, Lee Jersey also knows that the book is a world of mystery, danger, horror, and horror. The gods really exist here, and the evil gods are waiting for revival in the Curtain of Shadows. This is a world with extraordinary power. A bug passing by your feet, a cat jumping onto the windowsill, or even your big golden dog at home may possess mysterious powers that you cannot imagine. How could I cross into such a dangerous world? Lee Jersey looked at the left wheel in his hand and gave a bitter smile. He really wants to put one of them into his own head. Compared to the eerie and bizarre ways of death in the world depicted in the book, to die under a gun is already considered benevolent. The left wheel was lowered, and Lee Jersey shook his head vigorously. The ants were still greedy, let alone humans. Moreover, God knows if he can survive and be reborn after death, and he dare not gamble. At this moment, a soft shout came from outside the door, followed by someone shouting, "Mr. Shifa, are you okay?" Lee Jersey turned around and saw a young man standing at the door of the room, about 20.7 or 8 years old, with blonde hair and a nose like an eagle's beak. Lee Jersey remembers his name is Joyce and he comes from Tinjin City. He went to the southern continent for a business and recently boarded the Alfalfa to return to Tinjin. I'm fine, that's it. Lee Jersey's gaze wandered back and forth between the two corpses. I was discovered by them and had to kill them. Joyce only then discovered 2 corpses in the room. The blond young man's face turned pale and he said, "We just heard gunshots. The captain thinks you might have had an accident, and Mr. Triss also thinks we should take action early. After all, gunshots will definitely catch the attention of those lunatics. Now everyone has left the lower deck, why don't you come together?" Lee Jersey nodded, took a deep breath, and walked towards the door. I can't go back anymore. What can be done now is to find a way to survive in this chaos. Then change the original owner's style evaluation, so as to gain the support of the family and have a way to access mysterious fields and become extraordinary. Only by becoming extraordinary can one have a trace of self-protection in this crazy and mysterious world. So Lee Jersey walked out the door, and as he passed by Joyce, he seemed to be talking to himself. From now on, I am Lee Jersey, and so am I. Shifa Disraeli. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Extraordinary Events. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Extraordinary Events. The Alfalfa is a modern vessel powered by a hybrid of steam and sails, with 3 decks that can accommodate a considerable number of passengers. Now, a group of people have gathered at the staircase leading to the upper deck. Among them were passengers on the ship as well as sailors. When Shifa and Joyce arrived, they saw a person wearing the standard boat-shaped hat of this era and a thick coat covered in blood, speaking confidently. In his hand, he also held a brass left wheel with a metallic luster. This is the captain of the Alfalfa and one of the heroes who saved West France and others in this chaos. If it weren't for the captain's foresight, he would have collected a large amount of water and food quietly and hoarded them on the lower deck when he noticed signs of deterioration in the chaos on the ship. It is impossible for people like Shifa to persist, let alone retain sufficient physical fitness now. Those lunatics are no longer capable. In the absence of water and food, they have reached their limits. Unlike us, gentlemen, we have sufficient physical strength to complete a fierce battle. Now, we must rush forward, we must gain control of the alfalfa, we must sanction those lunatics. Only then can we, as people, have hope to see land and return home. Speaking of which, the captain put on his hat with his left wheel, scanned the crowd, passed by Cecil and Joel, and nodded. "Don't be afraid, everyone." A gentle but courageous voice rang out, and Shifa saw an inconspicuous man with a round, kind face. He was about the same age as West France, with a friendly temperament and a hint of shyness. He stood firmly by the captain's side and spoke in an encouraging tone. "We are doing the right thing. You should know what these lunatics have done in the past few days. They put bullets and swords into the bodies of our wives, friends, and even children. They beheaded those kind, restrained, and rational innocent people. To this day, the heads of those poor people are still hanging from the mast. They are lunatics, criminals, murderers, and villains. Tell me, gentlemen, do you still have pity for such people?" People gasped for breath, their eyes red, and roared like wild beasts. "No, they all deserve to die." Shifa was quite in agreement, feeling his blood pumping and eager to rush forward and kill all those lunatics. "Tell me, do you want to forgive them?" "Never." "Tell me, what are you going to do?" Shifa followed everyone and blurted out, "Fight, kill all these lunatics." "Idiots." A group of idiots. Suddenly, Shifa seemed to hear someone speaking, retreating from his passionate emotions and looking left and right with suspicion. I didn't see anyone suspicious. But I found that the people around me were all in a strange state of excitement. Their pupils slightly dilated, their fingers trembled lightly due to excitement, their breathing was heavy, and their eyes were filled with wild light. They are like a pack of wild beasts. Shifa suddenly shuddered. Just now, he should be like them. Why is this happening? Everyone seems to have lost their rationality. What's the difference between this and those crazy people above? Wait a minute. There is extraordinary power in this world. Can we say that this strange emotion is influenced by some extraordinary factor? Are there any extraordinary among us? At this moment, the captain shouted softly in a low voice, "What are we waiting for? Follow me, let's go punish those lunatics." He carried the left wheel and was the first to rush up the stairs. Including Joyce, the men roared from their throats, staring at their bloodshot eyes, holding all the weapons they could obtain, and following the captain closely. In the crowd, Triss suddenly stopped and looked back. Feeling his gaze, Shifa raised his head and saw the round-faced boy also feeling excited, but with a hint of restraint. He asked, "Mr. Shifa, won't you come together?" How could it be? Shifa controlled the muscles on his face, striving to make his eyes wide and his mouth curled up, showing a somewhat insane appearance. "I wish I could kill all those sons of bitches." He rushed past Triss. "I cannot doubt that if there is truly an extraordinary person among us who contributed to this disaster, I must be even more careful. I remind myself in my heart that Shifa is keeping up with the pace of others." Before rushing up the stairs, I heard gunshots, roars, and screams coming from above. The battle has already begun. Shifa walked low against the walls of the cabin, using wooden crates scattered on the deck as a cover, carefully avoiding any stray bullets that could appear at any time. After confirming that no one was paying attention around, he quietly crawled into the cabin and found a horse lamp in the spacious carpeted aisle. Shifa lit up the horse lantern and, with a dim yellow light, saw the carpets and walls of the hallway covered in solidified dark red blood. He did not participate in the battle, but went deep into the cabin and found a second-class cabin to infiltrate. Closed the door, placed the lantern on the round table next to it, and Shifa sat down. "This is too crazy." Shifa supported his forehead with his hand and said, "You cannot panic, you must carefully consider countermeasures and make the worst possible plan. The worst-case scenario is that this frenzy and chaos that affects the entire ship is influenced by extraordinary factors and a man-made disaster. Kill them all. If we kill everyone except us, it will be safe. We can break their heads, crush their brains, tear open their bodies, dig out their organs, and tear open their intestines. Ha ha ha, isn't this a pleasant thing? So what are you waiting for? Take action. Lee Jersey. In the dim yellow light, the corner of Shifa's mouth gradually lifted upwards, and the light shone from bottom to top, leaving a mottled shadow on his face. With his hand on his forehead, he wiped it down and the corners of his mouth returned to normal. In a voice he could only hear, he said, "As a highly educated and normal person, I would not join the ranks of lunatics, either side. However, it's not realistic to stop them either. I'm just an ordinary person. Recklessly confronting events that seem to involve supernatural factors is like seeking death. So, I can only pretend to know nothing and try to protect myself until I get off the ship." Suddenly, Shifa's expression was taken aback. At the end of the field of vision, in the light of the lantern, a dark red silently flowed. He moved stiffly, lifting his head bit by bit, his gaze moving forward, and Shifa saw a wooden door that was slightly open. Behind the door is the bedroom, and through the crack in the door, there is a slow surge of dark red plasma. They spread across the floor, invaded the carpet, and worked hard to extend towards the west direction. Ho, ho, there is a strange sound coming from the bedroom, very faint, not like a human voice. Shifa looked at the crack in the door and felt the strong malice flowing out from the darkness of the crack. He stood up gently, afraid to make any sound. He clenched the left wheel, lifted the lantern, and stepped back. Shifa suppressed his curiosity, restrained his impulse, and did not push open the open door, fearing that it might explode some potential danger. He silently exited the room and returned to the aisle of the cabin until he closed the door, and only then did Shifa breathe a sigh of relief. Before his tense nerves could relax, someone in the hallway called out softly, "Young Master Shifa, is that you?" Shifa, who was already in a state of tension, was once again struck with excitement upon hearing these words. He quickly picked up the lantern, wanting to see more and farther. Unfortunately, the distance of the lights was limited, and Shifa could only see someone standing in a dimly lit area not far ahead. The other person also held a lantern, but it was casually held in their hand and placed at their feet, illuminating the nearby ground while keeping their upper body hidden in the darkness. He suddenly lifted the lantern and a face with a deeper outline but an ordinary appearance appeared in the light. On this face, the corners of the mouth curled up, revealing 8 teeth and a stiff smile. "Jack." Shifa blurted out and called out the other person's name. "This is his personal servant." On his journey to Port and Mat, his father arranged for a personal servant to be responsible for his daily life. A bodyguard has been arranged to provide personal protection. When infighting and tearing occurred on the ship, the bodyguards had already sacrificed their lives, while the male servants were caught by the group of lunatics. Shifa thought his servant had been killed, but to his surprise, he was still alive. This state seems very abnormal. "It's me." Jack maintained his stiff and eerie smile and said, "Master Shifa, please come with me. I know a safe place." Shifa not only didn't move forward, but also stepped back and said, "I'm not going anywhere, Jack." Young Master is still as stubborn as ever. Always unwilling to listen to advice, always acting on one's own, always assuming oneself to be right. Jack spoke quickly and urgently, but the smile on his face did not change. Seeing Shifa's hair rise, his scalp exploded. "Don't you know that you're annoying? Shifa Disraeli, you're just a jerk. You scumbag. Bastard. Scumbag. From the day you defiled Rachel, you know how much I wanted to kill you. No, killing you was too cheap for you. I'm going to chop you up, feed the fish with your meat, and throw your bones to the hungry dog. Damn it, that's how you damn it." Of course, Shifa knows who Rachel is, the maid who has been harmed by him. "From this incident, I also feel that your young master is not a good person. But that has nothing to do with me. Shifa felt a bit helpless and wanted to smile bitterly at the thought of having to help the original owner clean up those mess in the future. Suddenly, Jack lifted his other hand up. On that hand, holding a left wheel. Bang! Jack's head swung back abruptly, and in the reverberating sound of gunshots in the hallway, his forehead cracked, blood and bone fragments shot and splattered. It wasn't until he saw smoke rising from the muzzle of the snake-scale revolver that Shifa realized that he had actually shot and killed the male servant. Is the original owner's marksmanship so good, as the body moves faster than the brain and can kill with just one shot? The despicable aristocracy finally had some redeeming qualities. Shifa smiled self-deprecatingly, and suddenly, there was a corner of his eye. He saw a cold white light flickering behind Jack, breaking through the air and pointing towards him. Surprisingly, there is someone else behind the male servant. P.S. New book seeking collection and recommendations uploading for nearly 10 days, finally waiting for the website to be short. Mengxin mustered up the courage, confidence, to ask for collection and recommendation from all the handsome and extraordinary viewers who have been watching. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Mysterious Classics. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Mysterious Classics. Shifa only felt a chill in his arm holding the gun, and his hand was involuntarily lifted and patted against the wall. At this moment, he saw clearly that a chef's bone-picking knife had scratched his arm and nailed his sleeve to the wooden wall of the cabin. He quickly grabbed the bone-picking knife with his other hand, wanting to pull it out, when a sharp sound rang in his ear. After the fallen servant, a thin man wearing a chef's hat rushed over. The chef on this ship remained silent and stood behind Jack until now when he launched an attack. Under the light of the lantern, Shifa saw his bloodshot eyes, his twisted features, and his dense white teeth, as if a beast about to devour people. The chef immediately pounced on Shifa. Shifa's head went blank with a buzzing sound, but his body reacted on its own. The hand holding the bone-picking knife exerted a strong force and pulled it out of the wooden wall, directly hitting the chef's face with the handle. In the muffled sound of impact, Shifa saw the chef's head tilted back, his face blossoming, and blood spurting out of his nose. But this did not make the chef afraid or retreat, but instead made him react to stress. The thin little man whose chef's hat had long fallen to the ground jumped up and grabbed Sifa's shoulder and cheek with his hands, exerting a force that exposed Sifa's neck under his gaze. He opened his mouth like a mad dog and bit it. Shifa could smell the stench in his mouth, see the splashing saliva, and the dark esophagus. As he was about to bite Chinese and Western French, the chef's movements suddenly stopped. A bone-picking knife pierced his chin, passed through his mouth, and penetrated deep into his head. The madness in the chef's eyes quickly dissipated, losing its brilliance. Under the influence of inertia, it collided with Shifa's body, and then both of them slipped at the same time. Sitting on the ground, Shifa took a deep breath, and his stiff mind only then resumed its activity. He quickly pushed away the chef's body and looked at his formal attire stained red with blood, shocked and bewildered. What's going on with myself? I know that the original owner, as a nobleman, received training in marksmanship and combat. But whether it's shooting that close servant or using a bone-picking knife to kill this chef, I'm too skilled, right? Shifa supported his forehead, pressing on both sides of his head, recalling the events. After 2 attacks, as a person who grew up in a stable society, he had no idea how to deal with it and his brain was completely blank. But the body responds instinctively, and this sharp and direct attack behavior is no longer explained by training. That's like, the original owner has a lot of experience in killing people. Shifa was unable to associate a noble scumbag with a killer, but when he pondered deeply, he heard the sound of falling into the water, and then a familiar voice came faintly. Help me, I. A young man with blonde hair and an eagle nose swayed in his mind. It was Joyce. He fell into the water. Shifa quickly put away the left wheel and ran out of the cabin. The battle outside had already passed away, and there was no one nearby. Not far away, the deck was still burning, and with the help of the flames, Shifa saw people floating and sinking in the sea below the ship. Shifa quickly took off his coat, kicked off his shoes, and jumped out of the ship's side. He plunged into the cold seawater and swam towards the person who had fallen into the water. As he got closer, he saw that the person's blonde hair had soaked through and was pressing against his face. It was Joyce. Joyce saw someone and shouted, "Please help me, I have a cramp in my leg." "Mr. Shifa, it turned out to be you." Shifa said in a soothing tone, "Stay calm, I'll come over right away." He swam behind Joyce, supported his armpits with both hands, and used reverse breaststroke to drag the blonde youth closer to the ship. He found a boarding ladder and climbed up. Returning to the deck, Shifa pulled the blonde young man up, and his legs, soaked all over, softened and he sat down. Joyce gasped for breath and looked at Shifa sincerely, saying, "Thank you so much, Mr. Shifa. I thought I was going to die in the sea." Shifa had no strength to answer, so he could only wave his hand. At this moment, cheers came from the upper deck, and then he heard someone shouting. "Eunice is dead, Eunice King is dead. The captain killed him, and we won. Eunice is a villain who even committed the evil act of throwing babies into the sea. He led those crazy beasts, slaughtered a large number of people on the ship, and occupied the cockpit. His death is of great significance." Upon hearing this news, Joyce, who was struggling in the water and had almost no strength, also lifted his head excitedly and said, "We won. Oh my God, the disaster has finally passed." Wearing wet clothes is not a pleasant thing, but Shifa is willing to endure it. Now he is in front of the second-class cabin door where an abnormal situation was previously discovered. Using suspicion that there may be residual madmen in the bedroom as a reason, he easily persuaded the captain to organize personnel to inspect the room and bedroom. Just now, shortly after the captain and his companions entered, Shifa, who was waiting in the hallway, heard a cry of surprise coming from inside. The situation in the bedroom was probably very bad, but there was no sound of fighting, which surprised him a bit. After a moment, the captain wearing a boat-shaped hat walked out, and under the dim light of the horse lamp, his face was not good looking. Then the two sailors carried a stretcher out, on which a corpse should have been lying, covered with a white cloth, and hastily lifted it out of the cabin. The captain put a hat on the barrel of his revolver and glanced at Shifa, saying, "That corpse is terrible, it's missing some meat." Missing some meat. Shifa tried his best not to think about where the missing meat went. It seems that the captain is unwilling to communicate more in this regard. He said to the people around him, "Everyone is tired tonight, and the lunatics on board have received the necessary sanctions. Everyone can choose a clean room to rest at will. Tomorrow, let's discuss the path we need to take next." The crowd dispersed. According to a memory, Shifa found his previous first-class cabin. This is a room that can accommodate 3 servants, with dedicated chefs, a restaurant with scenic views, a dedicated room for smoking cigars, and a gathering place for playing cards. But now, it's just a spacious enough room. Shifa took off his soaked clothes, took a shower, and then threw himself onto the bed. In a moment, he had already fallen asleep. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the sky outside the window shining with white light. It was already the morning of the second day. Shifa opened his wardrobe and found his own shirt, vest, formal attire, pants, half-height silk top hat, as well as a gold-plated iron core wooden cane. He put on his clothes, picked up the heavy cane, walked to the living room, and sat down on a sofa. "I think, what exactly did I do to make me travel inexplicably?" Shifa crossed his legs and placed his hand on the armrest of the sofa, tapping the armrest with his 5 fingers in a regular pattern. Memory is like boiling water, with bubbles emerging from the surface one after another. Well, during this period of time, I have developed a strong interest in the secret contract magic because I have read the masterpiece, The Lord of Secrets. I have collected a large amount of information in this area, and even searched for a book called Tree of Life Kabbalah on a certain treasure. By the way, I remember. I received an email that recorded an ancient ceremony. With a playful idea in mind, I held this ceremony, and the result was. Shifa stood up. If I traveled through this ceremony, what would happen if I held this ceremony here? The worst thing is that I can't go back, stay in this mysterious world forever. Where else can I go wrong? Shifa put down his cane and found a dagger left by a bodyguard in the room, as well as several candles. He recalled the contents of the ceremony, lifted the carpet, and used a dagger to carve and scratch on the wooden floor. For the convenience of work, he took off his coat and lay on the floor wearing a shirt, carving an untidy six-pointed star. Next, 2 concentric circles were carved on the outer side of the hexagram. Then, on the ritual, between the 2 concentric circles, 12 symbolic symbols representing natural elements such as earth, water, fire, and wind, were carved, arranged and distributed according to the 12 grids of the dial. Finally, Shifa took out 3 candles and lit them, placing them on the 3 stars on the left, right, and bottom respectively. Having done all of this, he stood at the center of the hexagram himself. Using his breath to adjust his mood, Shifa finally said softly, "Let's start." He solemnly raised his left hand, palms facing upwards, and whispered, "Eyes that perceive everything." Then he raised his right hand, palm facing upwards, and recited again, "The deity who overlooks all things." He exhaled his turbid breath, clasped his hands together, and sincerely praised, "You are the master of knowledge, mocking fate and manipulating time." Finally, he spread out his hands as if to embrace the morning light. "You are a true witness, the uncrowned king above the starry sky. The ceremony is over." Shifa looked around. Nothing happened. Is it a failure? Still no response. A wave of frustration surged in his heart, and Shifa sighed and wanted to leave. Suddenly, he saw the window in front, the curtains lifted by the morning breeze, which had not fallen for a long time. He saw the dust in the morning light, as if still, hovering quietly in mid-air. He saw the colors of the things around him gradually becoming more intense, with red becoming redder, blue becoming bluer, and yellow becoming yellower. The scene before him seemed to transform into a brightly colored oil painting. At this moment, there was a heavy feeling in my hand. A heavy classic book emerges from nothingness, with an illusory and hazy light outlining the pattern. An eye gazing at a stable triangle appears on the cover. Following this, a line of information appeared below the pattern. Knowledge Permissions. Point 9. Above this classic, there is also a pair of illusory hands covered in various strange patterns and symbols, slowly retreating into the void. Shifa only casually glanced at one of the small patterns on his hand and felt fear and panic for no reason. Without daring to look directly, he quickly shifted his attention to the classic book in his hand, unconsciously forgetting the scene he had just seen. Classics emerging from the air, books summoned by rituals. So eerie and mysterious, Shifa was stunned. Isn't this the book he saw when he first woke up last night? Upon closer inspection, Shifa noticed that the eye on the cover was surrounded by 7 blurry symbols. Now, a symbol is becoming clear. The mist that enveloped the symbol gradually dissipated in the morning light, allowing Shifa to see the symbol. It is an unfolded book, surrounded by many illusory and ethereal eyes. They surround the book as if observing and reading. Compared to last night, this book clearly has undergone changes. With anticipation, hidden fear, and patient unease, Shifa reached out to touch the cover. A hard touch came from his fingertips, like a physical object. He gritted his teeth and opened the cover, only to see a white feather pen added to the slightly yellowed paper. Shifa tried to pick up the feather pen, feeling light and floating, but there was indeed a feeling of holding the actual object. Suddenly, his pupils slightly dilated. He saw that the information on the first line of the paper had changed, and there was more content on the paper than he had seen last night. Collection 1+ record. Your adventure biography has received more than 1 collection attention. You have met the conditions and will be released. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Exchange of Information. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Exchange of Information Collection. 1 Plus Record. Your adventure biography has received more than one collection following, and you have met the conditions. The restriction on using the message board has been lifted. Shifa's gaze naturally shifted downwards, and he saw a box below with the message board. 1 inch inside. Message board. Can I leave a message on it? For whom to see? Shifa's mind didn't turn around for a moment, and then he realized that there was other information on the paper. It's right under the message board. Faceless man. Is it a mysterious fan? Collect it decisively, the mountains and seas are endless. Go on an adventure, young man, it's not enough to see. Buzz. Shifa seemed to have been struck by lightning and almost didn't jump up. Is this a reader's message? In the eyes of those commentators, am I a character from a certain novel? Suddenly, Shifa's head became a mess. He has read a lot of internet novels from his past life, but he hasn't read either. Which novel has a protagonist in a similar situation? Only the death attendant of a certain manga knew that he was a character in the manga. Unexpectedly, today he also became a character in a certain novel, and could still see reader comments. Wait a minute. Shifa quickly looked up and his gaze fell on the message board. Can this thing allow me to communicate with the reader? What to communicate? Information. Yes, important information can be exchanged. Shifa patted his head. I have only read less than 50 chapters of the novel, The Lord of Secrets, and I am not familiar with the events that will follow or the mysteries in the book. But the readers know, and I can see their comments. In that case, I can get important information from them through the message board. Well, if they are willing to leave a comment, they should be able to, write anyway, give it a try first before we talk. Shifa picked up the feather pen and wrote on the message board. Dear readers, not appropriate. Shifa shook his head and crossed out the remaining words. A magical thing happened, and the crossed out words disappeared. Is there still such an operation? He calmed down and continued to ponder. I am just a character in a novel, and there is no doubt that those readers are far above me. The preferences of some popular novels even determine the development of the plot. To request their help, one must have a more sincere attitude and a higher title. After some deliberation, Shifa continued to write on the message board. Great, omniscient, non-dimensional gazers. I request your assistance and I need your advice. I want to know which extraordinary path is more suitable for me, and I hope you can respond. Thank you very much. After finishing writing, Shifa noticed that the number on the message board had changed from 1 to 0. Originally, that number represents the number of times the message board has been used. After examining it several times and realizing that there was no problem, Shifa put down his feather pen and closed this heavy but illusory classic. It began to fade its color, its form became lighter, and dissipated like green smoke. Subsequently, the colors of various things in the room returned to normal, the curtains blown by the wind fell down, and the dust hovering in mid-air also drifted away. Everything returns to its original state. Except for Shifa, he felt dizzy and as if he had spent the whole morning reading, which consumed a lot of energy. At this moment, his forehead was slightly tingling, as if he had been pricked with a needle a few times. He quickly walked up to a bronze mirror, brushed aside his broken hair, and saw a 6-pointed star disappearing from his forehead. Is this a fixed ceremony? In the future, you don't need to draw a 6-pointed star and can recite a prayer directly to summon that mysterious scripture. Shifa put down his hair, took out a dagger, and destroyed the magic circle on the floor to prevent anyone from seeing anything. Then he covered the carpet and sat back on the sofa. Next, let's consider the issue of self-protection. Due to internal conflicts, the Alfalfa has deviated from its original route and it will take some time to arrive at the port of Enmat. That is to say, the next days will be spent on the boat. If there are no extraordinary factors, the problem is not significant. Recalling the internal strife among the crew on the ship and the unusually excited companions last night, Shifa vaguely felt that there were extraordinary people involved in this bloody incident at sea. In this way, it is difficult to guarantee that there will be no accidents in the following voyage. Investigating the extraordinary as an ordinary person is seeking death, so this option is not considered. What I need to consider is how to ensure that I can safely disembark. The bodyguard has died, and the close male servant has also died. I lack a guardian around me. If there is another internal conflict among the survivors, I'm afraid I won't be so lucky this time. So, I have to gather survivors, the more people the better. So the next question is, how can I gather them? What kind of compensation must I give in order for them to wholeheartedly protect me? What are my strengths and how can I utilize them to create favorable conditions for me? Also, we need to find a way to make the extraordinary ignore me, if there are any extraordinary among us. After some analysis, West France already has a clear plan for its next actions. Gollum. My stomach rang, and hunger drove Shifa up. Put on formal attire, pick up a cane, put on a top hat, and head to the restaurant. In the restaurant, most of the survivors had already woken up and sat in groups of 3 or 2. As soon as he entered, Shifa saw Joyce, the young man with blonde hair and an eagle nose, opening a silver pocket watch and looking at a photo inside. In the photo, there is a young woman wearing a silk hat, with beautiful eyes and a warm smile. She is very beautiful. Walking up to Joyce, Shifa lowered his volume and smiled loudly. Joyce turned around and smiled, "Thank you, you're up, Mr. Shifa." Shifa nodded and pressed his top hat, "Can I sit here?" "Of course you can." After Shifa took his seat, Joyce said, "This is my fiancée A.E., her name is Anna. She must be a lucky lady, because even if her fiancé A is far away, she misses her so much." Joyce sighed and said, "But I don't know if I can still see her." Shifa leaned back slightly and said, "Why do you say that?" Joyce smiled bitterly and said, "Mr. Shifa, we are murderers now. With so many people dead on the ship, we will definitely be under investigation when we return. One thing is not good, there is also the disaster of imprisonment. Even if Anna can still be seen, she may still be in prison." Joyce looked around at the survivors and said, "Actually, I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Everyone thinks there will be some trouble when we go back. Sure enough, it's similar to what I thought. After all, so many people have died on the ship. After landing, the police will definitely be alarmed and we must accept an investigation. It is normal to worry about being imprisoned for this." Shifa coughed and said, "If that's the problem, maybe I can help." Joyce lifted his head and his eyes sparkled, "Mr. Shifa, you. My father is Baron Bidsun Disraeli. After getting off the ship, I will send him a telegram. I believe he will bring a lawyer over, and then I can have the lawyer defend you and me, no, for everyone. If the police find us guilty." Shifa deliberately raised the volume slightly to make nearby people hear it, which immediately attracted attention and sparked discussion. Joyce said even more, "Mr. Shifa, are you really willing to do this?" Shifa nodded happily and said, "Of course, I have experienced all of this and I know that everyone present here is innocent. As someone who has received a good education and has the right mindset, how can I see so many innocent people suffering unjustly? So I will definitely have a lawyer defend everyone and ensure that everyone can go home." Upon hearing these words, the solemn expressions on the faces of the survivors in the restaurant gradually disappeared. It turns out that Mr. Shifa is a nobleman. If he stands with us, then we can rest assured. And words like this are quietly spreading in the restaurant. Shifa is very satisfied and things are moving in the direction he hopes. His aristocratic status is his advantage, and he also shows his attitude, standing with the survivors. In this way, everyone's interests are unified. If something happens again, in order to ensure that his interests are not harmed, I believe many people will step forward to protect him. Just as everyone was discussing, footsteps sounded as the captain wearing a boat-shaped hat, the round-faced and friendly young man Triss, and two other sailors walked in. The captain let out a dry cough and focused everyone's attention on him. "Good morning, gentlemen. I'm sorry to disturb your meal, but there's something I need to discuss with you. It's about our next itinerary." Someone stood up, with a burly figure and thick body hair. The man with black hair, brown pupils, and a weathered face said, "Captain, aren't we going back to Port and Mat? What's there to discuss?" The captain reached out and made a downward movement. "Please sit down, Mr. Brando." Then he turned his back and said, "That's right, according to the original itinerary, we do have to go to the Port of Smart. But gentlemen, don't forget what has happened on our ship these past few days. Although those lunatics are murderers and we give them just punishment, the essence of this matter is that we ourselves have become murderers. Believe me, the police officers at Smartport don't have much better brains than curly-haired baboons. I can guess that under pressure, they will eventually define this case as a brawl. In that case, we all have to go to jail. My idea is that we should replenish supplies at the nearby port before the situation is exposed, and then head to Bayham, the city of generosity. We can go there to take shelter for a while, and when the wind passes, we'll try to return." Suddenly, a huge uproar erupted in the restaurant. Shifa shook his head and whispered, "In that case, our suspicion will be even greater. Even if there is a lawyer defending us, we cannot explain it clearly." Upon hearing these words, the blond young man who was eager to go home and meet his fiancée AE suddenly stood up with bright eyes. "Everyone, be quiet, listen to me." Joyce waved his hands vigorously to attract everyone's attention. After the restaurant quieted down, he loudly said, "Captain, we had considered similar issues before you came. We were both confused and anxious. However, Mr. Shifa made a promise to everyone that he would have a lawyer defend us and he would let us all go home." The captain frowned and said, "If we were lawyers, I know one or two of them. But I don't think the lawyers we have access to can solve such a big case." Joyce confidently said, "But Mr. Cecil is different. His father is a baron, a nobleman. A lawyer hired by a baron to defend us, what else do we need to worry about?" The captain looked surprised at Shifa and said, "Is this true? Mr. Shifa, your father is a baron. Munshin is here to pay homage to all the great observers and plead with everyone not to raise books during the new book period. Nowadays, when a website recommends something, you have to look at the follow.up reading. If there is no follow.up reading, there will be no grades, and if there are no grades, there will be no recommendations. The life or death of a new book depends on the follow.up reading during this period. Only with recommendations from high school students can they advance. It's really difficult for newcomers. If you think this book is still a bit interesting, I hope everyone can support me more. Don't keep books, it's really important to keep reading." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Showing the enemy with weakness, recommended for collection. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Showing the enemy with weakness, recommended for collection. Very good, things are moving in the direction I hope. Respond passively, reveal your identity passively, do not give people the feeling of actively participating, and avoid inducing hostility from the unknown extraordinary to the greatest extent possible. Putting aside his scattered thoughts, Shifa stood up with a natural expression and responded, "Exactly, my father is Baron Bison Disraeli. As I told Joyce before, after arriving at the port, I will contact my father and ask him to entrust a lawyer to defend us. The gentlemen present here, including myself, have participated in more than one dangerous battle," said Shifa, striving to show himself as righteous and resolute. "Of course, in those battles, our hands were stained with blood. But its essence is justice, an act of defending one's own life. I cannot tolerate such things being equated with crime. I will make lawyers strive to fight for the fair treatment we deserve and uphold our reputation. We are not murderers." Joyce clenched his pocket watch, grasped the important object, and agreed, Mr. Shifa is right. We are not murderers, we don't need to escape, we don't need to hide. We should receive fair treatment. In the restaurant, people were inspired by the words of the two Westerners in French, and responded one after another. Seeing this, the captain pressed down his hands slightly, gesturing for everyone to be quiet, and then said, since that's the case, let's go to port and mat. Upon hearing the captain's decision, the restaurant erupted with cheers. After cheering, Shifa coughed and pressed his top hat, speaking to the young man with blonde hair and an eagle nose in an awkward yet somewhat embarrassed tone. Joyce, I'm not sure if you're willing to move to first class. My bodyguard and servants have already died. The room suddenly seemed a bit empty, and I always felt uneasy living alone. He looked at the captain again and said, besides, I am very concerned about what happened in the second-class cabin last night. I always feel that those lunatics are not dead, maybe there are still one or two people hiding somewhere on the ship. The experienced captain easily understood his meaning from Shifa's expression and words. I'm very scared, I need protection. Considering that this is a noble young master, it is quite normal to have such a reaction. The captain was just about to ask, who else is willing to move to the first-class cabin to protect this important figure who concerns the future of the entire ship. The burly man before stood up and said, young Master Shifa, if you don't mind, I'm willing to move over together. My name is Brando, a former Royal Army sergeant. I have participated in colonial wars in the southern continent and my skills have not yet declined. In order to go home and see my two lovely children, I swear to do my best to protect you. Obviously, the captain is not the only one who understands the subtext of Western France. That's really great, Mr. Brando. During your time on the ship, I will pay you the corresponding compensation according to the salary of the temporary bodyguard, said West France half truthfully and half pretending happily, of course, after getting off the ship. After all, my wallet is already in the hands of that king of the 5 seas. Brando was pleasantly surprised but still waved his hand and said, no, 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 you hired a lawyer to defend us, and you have already done us a great favor. How can I still receive payment? Shifa insisted, please make sure to accept it, Mr. Brando. These are two different things. Okay then. Thank you for your generosity. Brando did not refuse again, as he lost all his possessions due to the visit of the King of the 5 Seas. And he still has 2 children to support, with a temporary bodyguard's salary to make up for it. At least after returning home, this salary will be enough for him to sustain until he finds his next job. Seeing Brando's agreement, Shifa also breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, knowing that he had completed the second step of the plan, showing weakness to the extraordinary person hidden in the crowd. This is very important. Throughout the entire incident, the unidentified extraordinary did not cause the entire ship to die. Shifa believes that if he is willing, he should be able to do it. So, for him, keeping a small portion of people alive may be a necessity. Under this premise, as long as one does not show any threat, there is a high probability that they will be ignored. So, how can we make ourselves appear less threatening? That is naturally a sign of weakness. Based on the above judgment, the performance of the scene just now came to fruition. The itinerary has been decided, and Western France has provided legal aid. People seem to see a bright future, and the atmosphere in the restaurant has changed from heavy to lively and lively. After finishing breakfast, Shifa returned to the cabin with Joyce and Brando. Those 2 people will first go back to their own room, pack their things, and later move to the first-class cabin. Shifa returned to his room alone. Shortly after closing the door, he took off his top hat and knocked on the door. So fast. He didn't put on a top hat or pick up his cane. Shifa opened the door and saw that it wasn't Joyce or the other 2 knocking, but a round-faced young man. Tris. Mr. Shifa, I'm here to express my gratitude, said Tris with a friendly smile. Shifa quickly took 2 steps back and said, please come in, Mr. Tris. Triss walked into the room, looked around, and sighed sincerely. It's truly a first-class room, big, luxurious, and grand. Shifa said half-jokingly, if you like, you can also move over. Anyway, there is still room left. Is that right? Triss had a warm smile and a hint of contemplation in his eyes, as if he was carefully considering the suggestion of West France. Seeing him like this, Shifa regretted it. Originally, Shifa only wanted to invite Joyce alone, but when Brando joined, it had already deviated from his expectations. You should know that he is a person with a secret. With too many people around, it is difficult for Shifa to summon that mysterious scripture and conduct research. If we add another Triss, Shifa can foresee that he won't have to do anything for the next leg of the voyage. Thank you for the invitation, but I prefer living alone. Fortunately, Triss politely declined, which secretly relieved Shifa. On the surface, he still looked regretful and said, okay, it's a pity. I thought there was a chance to be with you. In the past few days, your courage was admirable, and I really hope to make friends like you. Triss chuckled and said, I would also be happy to befriend a nobleman. Speaking of which, I sincerely thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shifa. Thank you for providing legal aid. If it weren't for you, we might have really considered going to the City of Generosity. Shifa smiled and shook his head. Compared to what you have done for us, I have only done something insignificant. You are so humble. Tristan paused, and his smile gradually faded from his round face. Mr. Shifa, I don't know if you have this feeling, he said, I always feel that this disaster is extraordinary. Behind the event, I vaguely smell the scent of conspiracy. Right, that's what I think too. Shifa almost blurted out, revealing his true feelings. Fortunately, he restrained the impulse in time and said, why do you say that? Don't you think it's abnormal? After being plundered by pirates, we should work together and unite to overcome the difficulties, Triss asked in response, but suddenly, the crew and sailors had an internal conflict over a small matter, and the situation deteriorated sharply. In a short period of time, it escalated into a bloody incident, causing the following events to become uncontrollable. Thoughts flashed through Shifa's heart. Why did he come to me to discuss this matter? Is Triss an extraordinary person? Is it the mastermind behind the scenes? He's testing me. Shifa was startled by his own idea, but at the same time, he felt it was impossible. Until now, extraordinary factors have only been his speculation, and he has yet to be certain. And if there is really an extraordinary person involved, this person has never appeared and has been hiding behind the scenes. How could he suddenly show up to test himself? Perhaps Triss is his accomplice. Perhaps Triss was guided by him. But no matter what, I have to be vigilant. Perhaps Triss' appearance was to test my ideas. I also feel that this whole thing is unusual when you say so. But Shifa shrugged his shoulders and spread out his hand, saying, let the police have a headache about this kind of thing. I just want to go ashore safely now, and I won't consider anything else. Directly denying it may seem too deliberate. Agree with Triss' viewpoint, but do not want to delve deeper. It is a normal person's approach to be cautious and cautious. Bang bang. There was a knocking on the door, indicating that Joyce and the other two had arrived. Shifa whispered, good day, and smiled as he stood up, please wait a moment. I'll go open the door. Triss followed suit and said, no, I still have something to do. Goodbye. Then I'll give it to you. Shifa escorted him to the door, opened it, and it was indeed Joyce and Brando outside. They were somewhat surprised to see Triss, exchanged a few pleasantries with each other, and then Triss turned around and left. After the young man's figure disappeared at the corner, Shifa withdrew his gaze and raised his hand to make an invitation gesture. Come on, gentlemen, let me show you all the rooms here. You can choose your favorite accommodation. July 1st. Sunday. Enmat Port remains bustling as always, as one of the coastal ports of the Kingdom of Ruin, where ships set sail or return every day. On a passenger ship that only returned yesterday, several sailors were cleaning the deck. A sailor suddenly squinted his eyes as he straightened up to rest. He saw a passenger ship with sails raised but steam released, preparing to enter the port. He also saw a pattern on the ship. It is composed of a complex purple, spirally arranged cluster of flowers. That's the logo of the Alfalfa. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Out of control of the situation, recommended for collection. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Out of control of the situation, recommended for collection. On the deck of the Alfalfa, gazing out at the distant port pier, Joyce exclaimed excitedly, "The steam is on board, we're back, we've finally arrived at Smartport." Standing next to him, Shifa was equally excited, but at least on the surface, he could still remain calm. This journey has indeed been difficult. They experienced storms, got lost at sea, and passed various tests before successfully arriving at the port. Anyone who sees land now has an impulse to pounce and kiss the ground. After the Alfalfa entered the port, before people had time to disembark. On the deck, Shifa saw a team of police officers rushing into the dock, wearing black but white checkered uniforms, badges and soft hats, with tense expressions. Suddenly, the atmosphere on the ship became tense. The captain said calmly, "Don't act rashly, everyone stay in place and let me communicate with the police officers." Shifa also stood up and said, "My identity should have some effect." The captain nodded, and by then the police had boarded the ship. They skillfully formed groups of 3 and quickly launched a search. Among them, several police teams arrived on the deck and came to the people's side. A police officer with a black beard strode forward and said, "I'm Inspector Roy. What happened on this ship?" His shoulder badge is made of 3 silver hexagonal stars, which meets his identity as an inspector. He continued, "We have received news that the Alfalfa was attacked shortly after leaving Caesar's port, and someone saw the emblem of the King of the Five Seas. But after that, you haven't heard from me for over a month. During this period, what happened on the ship? Additionally, I have noticed that there are blood stains on the ship that have not been completely cleaned, traces left by bullets and long swords, and why is there only so few people left on board?" One question after another hit like a shell, reminding people of those bloody memories. A few timid men had turned pale, their fingers trembling, and whispered, "That's not our business, it's not our business." Upon hearing these words, Inspector Roy's face became even more solemn and frightening. The captain coughed dryly and said, "Officer, it's like this. After we were robbed by pirates, a terrible disaster occurred on the ship." He roughly recounted the internal strife and the aftermath of the disaster, causing the bearded inspector's heart to sink. The police department of Simitport had already received news of the attack on the Alfalfa more than half a month ago. And for those passengers who have not returned on time, their families have recently come to the police department to inquire about information. Therefore, just as they received the news of the arrival of the Alfalfa, the police rushed over. As an experienced Roy, he is prepared for the worst. Unexpectedly, the situation was even worse than he had imagined. Footsteps came one after another, and several police teams ran onto the deck and reported to Roy. "Sir, we have found a large number of corpses. There are sailors and passengers on board." Roy nodded solemnly, his gray-blue eyes rolling as he looked at the captain. "The situation is very serious. Before we figure out the whole reason behind it, I hope you can cooperate. Now, I need to take you away. Please assist and cooperate with the investigation." "No." A short, bearded man rushed towards the direction of the gangway and said, "I'm not guilty, I want to go home." The captain exclaimed anxiously, "Mr. Segra, calm down." Before he could call the gentleman back, 2 police officers had already rushed forward, struck Segra with batons, and crushed him to the ground. "Don't do this, please let go of him." The captain quickly approached, but was stabbed in the stomach by a police baton, making it impossible for him to say the rest. "Hey, what are you guys doing? Why do we hit people? We're not criminals." The passengers became excited, and among them, the young man with a round face, Tris, stood up and said, "You can't treat us like this." But he also got hit by the police. Seeing this, people became even more excited and rushed to find the police to argue. Inspector Roy pulled out a pistol and pointed it at the people, shouting, "Stop it! Stop it all!" The police also rushed forward and hit the emotionally agitated passengers or sailors with batons, crushing them onto the deck. During this process, many people were injured. "Everyone, calm down. Maintain restraint." Shifa shouted loudly, hoping that people would not be impulsive, but at this moment, his voice was completely drowned out. A police officer rushed towards him, trying to grab his collar. Westphalia instinctively took a step back, allowing the police officer to catch him. No resistance. The police officer with brown pupils shouted loudly, pulled out a pistol, and pointed it at Shifa. Shifa could only raise his hand and say, "Officer, I am." Before he could finish speaking, a tall police officer pounced on him, using his broad palm to press Shifa's head and tightly pressing his cheek against the deck. Anger, humiliation, shock, and various emotions surged in my heart. Shifa wanted to lift his head, but his face was tightly pressed, and only his right eye could see the extremely narrow line of sight. He restrained his intense desire to erupt like a volcano and shouted, "Listen to me, officer. I am the son of Baron Bison Disraeli. Please do not harm me or the people on board, we will cooperate and assist in the investigation." But the police didn't pay any attention, and the big man who was pressing on Shifa impatiently shouted, "Shut up, you're the son of the Baron, then I'm still His Highness the Prince. If you have anything to say, wait to tell the judge. Now, get up." Shifa pulled it up and stuffed a piece of cloth into his mouth. It was a handkerchief from some police officer's body, and the taste was unrelated to freshness. The riot on the deck was quickly brought under control, and people were taken away by the police, including West France, and ultimately all were thrown into a temporary prison at the Port of Smart Police Department. In the overcrowded cell, Shifa took off his handkerchief and rushed to the door, shouting, "Officer! Officer! I am Shifa Disraeli. My father is a baron, and I want to send a telegram. I can pay." A police officer walked over and fiercely tapped the cell door with a stick, saying, "Step back, no noise." Shifa quickly withdrew his hand and had no choice but to step back. The development of the matter was completely different from what he had imagined. If he can't get in touch with his family, he doesn't know what will happen next. "See, I knew these curly-haired baboons wouldn't cooperate with your performance. What are you going to do now, Lee Jersey? I have an idea. Let the pigs in this cell fight. As long as they fight, the police will come in to investigate. Then, we'll catch one of them, twist his neck, and take his gun and rush out. We can do it. Let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. Let's do it this way." The corners of Shifa's mouth gradually and slightly raised. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Sequence Suggestions, Seeking Collection Recommendations. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Sequence Suggestions, Seeking Collection Recommendations. "Mr. Shifa, are you okay?" The familiar voice brought Shifa back to his senses, and in his sight was a young man with blonde hair and an eagle nose. Joyce's gaze looked somewhat worried. Shifa wiped his face and said, "I'm fine, don't worry. Although I'm not allowed to send a telegram, I believe my father will always keep an eye on the news from Port en Mat. As long as he knows that the alfalfa has entered the port, he will definitely come over. When the time comes, I will ask him to hire a lawyer, and we will definitely be able to go home." Pacifying the people in the prison cell, Shifa was actually not very confident in his heart. After all, the town of Enki was far away in Dixie County. And he is not sure if the police department will make the news of the alfalfa public. Perhaps by the time his family received the news, he would have been thrown into a real prison. In the afternoon, feeling uneasy, the prison door suddenly opened and a police officer wearing a black background and white checkered uniform asked, "Which one is Mr. Shifa?" Shifa looked up in shock and stood up to respond, "I am." The police officer took a step back and said, "Please follow me." In the cell, Tris stood up and said, "Where are you taking him?" The police officer waved his stick and said, "It's none of your business, sit down." Shifa turned around and said, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." "I hope so," he added in his heart. Shifa was taken to a quiet room and asked to sit down and wait. The police did not reveal anything throughout the process. Not long after, the door opened again and a burly figure squeezed in. Middle-aged male, tall in stature. Wearing a top hat, his eyebrows and eyes were deep, and his beard was carefully decorated, adding a touch of majesty to him. Wearing a white shirt, a black vest, and a suit of the same color, carrying a delicate cane, he walked in from the door. "They didn't hit you, did they, son?" Shifa suddenly stood up and exclaimed in surprise, "Dad." The man who walked into the room was none other than Sifa's father, Baron Bison Disraeli. An ambitious aristocrat who is not satisfied with the current situation. In recent years, various social activities have been actively carried out in order to enter the power center of the Kingdom of Rune and gain a place in the House of Lords. "How are you?" "Sit down and say." Bison extended his hand and made a downward movement. He pulled up a chair and sat down, saying, "Not long ago, we received news from the sea. I know that the ship you were on had an accident after leaving Caesar's port, and your mother is very worried. She asked me to come to Smartport to wait for news. I have been staying here for almost 2 weeks now, sending people to the port every day to inquire about news. I just went to meet a friend in the morning, and when I returned to the hotel in the afternoon, I heard that the Alfalfa had returned. At the same time, I heard that everyone on board has been locked up. The police department is unwilling to disclose more information, but I heard that a tragic incident occurred on your ship." Shifa nodded and said, "Father, I need a lawyer." Bison leaned back slightly and nodded slightly. "I know, before coming, I had already contacted Zilith. He will arrive tomorrow, no later than the day after tomorrow. Before that, don't say anything. I have already taken care of it, and later they will arrange a single cell for you." Upon hearing that Bayern had already hired a lawyer, Shifa breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Father, I hope Mr. Zilith can defend the other people on the ship. Can I ask for a reason? You know, this is not a simple case." Bison frowned. Shifa sorted out his thoughts before answering his father's question. "There are 2 reasons. Firstly, I promised them on the ship that after arriving at the port, I would hire a lawyer to defend them. You often tell me that reputation is the foundation of our foundation, and now is the time for me to fulfill my promise. Secondly, this is beneficial for shaping your image and enhancing your reputation. Please believe me, Father. We are victims of the tragedy on the Alfalfa, innocent, even if we have indeed been stained with blood. So, if you hire lawyers to help these people receive fair treatment, then I believe that a Baron Image who is willing to speak up for the lower class can help shorten the distance between you and the members of the House of Lords." Bison's eyes flashed with surprise, followed by a thoughtful expression, and finally nodded lightly. "You convinced me. All right, I'll discuss it with Zilith." At this moment, there was a knock on the door and a police officer walked in, coughing dry and saying, "It's almost time." Bison stood up and pressed his high hat, saying, "Stay well, don't worry. I'll come see you with the lawyer next time." After his father left, Shifa was taken to a single cell. The room is not large, with a bed and a separate bathroom. The environment is much better than the previous prison cell. After the door closed, Shifa sat down by the bed and observed for a moment. After confirming that no one was watching, he walked to the high window with a grid installed. He plans to summon that mysterious classic. During the time on the ship, due to concerns about attracting attention, West France dared not attempt that ceremony again. Now there is only him in the room, which happens to verify some ideas. Shifa raised his hands evenly and recited the mantra. This time there was no carving of the hexagram, no arrangement of candles, and Shifa was unsure if the ceremony was successful. However, after a moment, he found that the color of the cell began to become rich, and the dust in the air hovered again, all of which indicated that he had succeeded. The illusory classic reappeared, and Shifa instinctively did not look up, causing his gaze to fall at his feet, as if afraid of seeing something he shouldn't have seen. After the patterns and information on the cover of the mysterious book were fully presented, Shifa felt a heavy hand feel. He suppressed his fear and opened the cover. He saw the page of the book and the information he had written on the message board. As his gaze moved down, he saw some new messages. Reply to the questions raised on the message board. Shifa's mood suddenly transformed into joy and excitement. Sure enough, this mysterious classic can connect two dimensions of the world, allowing him to communicate with the readers. He couldn't wait to look at those replies. The mountains and seas are endless. What sequence to choose? Of course it's the assassin. Listen to me, there are surprises in this high sequence path. This tone, you added an expression afterwards, I'm very scared. Shifa continues to read further. Defending our side warrior. Alien, if it's a man, then he'll eat cassava. Scorching Galen. Decisively peek into the secret person. Faceless man assassin ecstatic, okay, just kidding. I will answer this question seriously. Applying for refinement is not feasible. I originally wanted to recommend the Go-san family or something, but considering that the protagonist is a nobleman. In that case, sequences mastered by arbitrators and churches, such as sailor sequences, generalists, and sleepless individuals, can all be considered. These sequences have detailed official information and can stabilize the ascending sequence. The only problem is slow upgrading and being subject to official supervision for other sequences. I personally think that Hunter sequence is also a good choice, as it enhances physical fitness, especially combat skills, at the beginning. With a slight promotion, you can play with fire. In terms of pure destructive power, this sequence can definitely squeeze into the top 3, end of this chapter. Chapter 8. Beating Heart. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Beating Heart. The Kingdom of Rune has 3 main, officially recognized churches. They are the Night Goddess Church, the Steam Church, and the Storm Church. These 3 churches all hold at least one complete sequence, and regarding this, I have read the first few dozen chapters of The Lord of Secrets and occasionally hear friends mention it, but I still know about Shifa. However, it was the first time he had heard of the arbitrator sequence. Moreover, the observer of Faceless Man recommended this sequence because of his noble status. So it seems that the arbitrator sequence should be related to this identity. Is it a sequence controlled by nobles or kingdoms? Obviously, among the 22 sequences, these few sequences have detailed information and can be steadily promoted due to their control by the church and the government. Welfare within the system. However, Western France knows that while enjoying institutional benefits, it also means taking on institutional responsibilities. And the observer also mentioned the issue of supervision. Just this question alone has led West France to reject these sequences. He is unwilling to accept the supervision of the church or kingdom officials. After all, he is a traveler with too many secrets. If one day it is discovered, I'm afraid I won't be locked up as a white mouse for research. In addition to the above, the observer also recommended the Hunter sequence. He pointed out that this sequence strengthens physical fitness and enhances combat ability from the beginning. After promotion, he still possesses the ability to ignite flames. He personally believes that the purely theoretical destructive power of this sequence can rank in the top 3. But he didn't give a recipe or potion where he could get the starting point of this sequence. Looking further down, there are also comments from other observers. Tai Yin Yuing Yu. Is the path of the witch not good? Number 201709131836455514. Assassin. We must have an assassin, let fate bring us together here. You are in the midst of mystery, with 22 paths to becoming a god, which can be divided into 9, corresponding to melancholy yubing, deep. Fried round and flat dough. Cake. I always feel that the way of the Black Emperor and the Judge is incomplete, the information behind was blocked. Why suddenly, something came to Shifa's mind. He closed this heavy classic book and his gaze fell on the information section on the cover. Knowledge permissions. Point 9. Can we say, because of insufficient permissions? Or is it that the level of knowledge left by these two observers is too high and beyond their permissions, so they cannot be read? At this moment, Shifa felt his head slightly dizzy, as if it had consumed a lot of energy. It seemed that summoning the mysterious book was very exhausting. He was thinking about how to lift the summon when he saw this illusory and shimmering heavy scripture, its form gradually fading and eventually disappearing into his hand. The colors of the surrounding scenes also returned to normal, and Shifa heard faint voices coming from outside the high window, clearly breaking away from the mysterious space of the summoning scriptures. It seems that I have found the switch for summoning. He sat down, poured himself a glass of water, held it in his hand, and continued to ponder. From the description of the observer, it can be seen that the hunter sequence emphasizes destructive power. Destruction is a very attractive element. Especially for men, who doesn't like to control immense destructive power. And besides being proficient in combat, this sequence also has the ability to control flames, which is another place that makes Shifa's heart flutter. Anyway, let's take note first. Shifa drank all the water from his cup and lay down on the bed, relaxing his mind and body to alleviate the slight headache caused by mental exhaustion. The next day, Bison came to visit with a middle-aged man with blue eyes and a high nose. He is the lawyer Zilif, the lawyer exclusively for his father Bid-Sun, who has solved many troubles for the Shifa family in recent years. Shifa communicated with the lawyer for an afternoon and patiently answered various questions raised by Zirif. After several reminders from the police, the visitor finally left. In the next few days, Shifa was occasionally interrogated by the police and occasionally saw Joyce and others, but they were unable to talk and could only take a quick glance before being brought back to their respective cells. Almost a week has passed in the blink of an eye. On that day, the prison door opened and Bison strode in with a loud voice, saying, "We can go home now, son." Shifa stood up happily and said, "Really? Of course it's true, and the other people on the ship have also been set free, they have been released," said Bid-Sun with a smile, "this is really good news." Shifa couldn't wait to leave this single room and followed his father to the police station lobby. Sure enough, he saw Joyce and others. Captain, Joyce, Brando, and others walked over and surrounded West France, expressing their sincere gratitude. During this process, Shifa noticed that Joyce's face was not very good. Although he had a smile on his face, his expression was somewhat tired, which was very different from the excitement and joy of others. After some pleasantries, Shifa pulled Joyce aside and said, "Your complexion is not very good. Are you okay?" Joyce shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Maybe it's because I've been having nightmares lately, and every time I wake up in the middle of the night, I don't get enough sleep, that's why." "Nightmare?" Shifa smiled and said, "What nightmare made your face look so ugly?" "I dreamt of falling off the alfalfa and into a deep red ocean. Fortunately, someone grabbed me, but I couldn't see him clearly. And I'm still holding someone, do you know who it is? It's actually Eunice King, that villain. Who knows why I dreamt of him, and in my dream, I actually tried to save him. But every time at the end, he would howl and fall down. Damn it, just then, the person who was catching me and couldn't see clearly also let go of his hand, and I fell down like this, and then I woke up in shock." Shifa said disapprovingly, "It's just a nightmare, don't take it to heart. Now that we're all free, you can go home with peace of mind." If you still have nightmares, go find a doctor, I mean a psychologist. I think you only have this reaction because you are too nervous and under too much pressure during this period. By the way, do you have any travel expenses? After speaking, Shifa self-mocked and said, I asked a stupid question, wait a moment. He walked towards Bayern and asked his father for a sum of money, of which £50 was used to pay Brando's bodyguard's salary, and the rest was distributed to the penniless survivors, allowing them to have money to go home. Of course, this is in the name of my father, Bison. Say goodbye to Joyce and others, leave the police station and go home with your father. Unexpectedly, near the gate, Shifa collided with Inspector Roy with a black beard and a tall police officer. Shifa remembers this tall police officer, who was on the deck and was the one who crushed himself. Is there anything else, officer? Bison's face was somewhat displeased. Inspector Roy coughed and introduced the police officer next to him. This is Officer Barton, respected Sir Bidson. In an incident a week ago, while on board the ship, Officer Barton was a bit reckless in his official duties and may have been too aggressive towards Mr. Cecil. So, he wants to take this opportunity to apologize to Mr. Shifa. Bison let out a sigh and looked towards the tall police officer. The police officer named Barton's forehead was covered in beads of sweat. After learning that Shifa was indeed the son of a baron, Barton felt uneasy. He remembered mocking West France and not listening to explanations at the time. As a small police officer in Port Smart, Barton was worried about facing retaliation from the nobility. So I pleaded with my superiors to create an opportunity to apologize proactively. After the inspector's introduction, Barton quickly took the first 2 steps, took off his soft hat, and bowed to Shifa, saying, I'm very sorry, Mr. Shifa. I apologize for my recklessness and impulsiveness in the past few days and hope to receive your forgiveness. This scene caught the attention of everyone in the hall, whispering and most shaking their heads. They don't have a high opinion of Barton and don't think that the noble young master will easily forgive this tall man. Shifa looked up at the police officer with a blank expression on his face and said, End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Return to Hometown. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Return to Hometown, I Refuse. When the clear and firm voice of West France rang out in the hall, people responded with bitter smiles and sighs. As the party involved, Barton's mind went blank with a buzzing sound. A thought immediately came to his mind that he was going to lose his job. As a nobleman, it is not difficult for him to lose his job as a small police officer. And next, he must find another way out. Before finding a job, his child may have to work as a newsboy or enter a black factory to work. His wife was already working as a whitewashing worker, and the poor woman's daily workload is likely to increase. Beside Barton, Inspector Roy wanted to snort through his nostrils as a sign of dissatisfaction. But considering the other party's identity and his own future, he chose to remain silent. But in those eyes, there was a careful concealment of anger. As for Bayern, he was not surprised at all. He was well aware of his son's temper, and if West France had indeed suffered such treatment on the ship, revenge will be the most normal option. I hope he doesn't make things too big, so as not to make it difficult to clean up. Bayern has already begun to consider stopping his son at a critical moment. At this moment, Shifa continued, Why should I forgive you? Officer Barton, you didn't do anything wrong. You are just fulfilling your duty as a police officer. If you need forgiveness for this, then it would be too difficult for us to be a police officer in our kingdom. Yes, I just. Barton was stunned, thinking he had misheard, and looked incredulously at his boss next to him. Roy also had a bewildered expression, unable to believe his ears. The young aristocrat in front of him not only did not mean to blame Barton, but also politely and implicitly praised Barton's behavior. This is a bit different from the nobles I know of. The inspector, who quickly regained his senses, saw his subordinates and quickly coughed, Don't you thank Mr. Shifa quickly. Barton woke up from a dream, sure that his job was saved, and happily said, Thank you for your magnanimity, Mr. Shifa. Shifa originally intended to say, "This is all my father's guidance." However, he remembered the reserved folk style of Luan. Such a blatant expression was too deliberate, so he only smiled and nodded goodbye. He and Bidsun got into a carriage that had been waiting for a long time. On the carriage, Bidsun sorted his clothes, took off his top hat, and looked at Shifa with a smile. Shifa made him feel a bit uneasy and couldn't help but say, "Father, just say whatever you want." "I don't have anything to say, I just find it strange. Shifa, when I saw you this time, I felt that you had changed a lot." Bison chuckled. The Baron counted his fingers and said, "First, let the lawyer defend the others, and then generously give away the travel expenses. Just now, you not only forgave the police officer, but also subtly praised his behavior. Well, if he could understand the meaning behind your words. To be honest, these were all things I didn't expect before I met you. Can you tell me what made you do this?" "Reason. That's probably because your son has already changed his person." Shifa adjusted his sitting posture and casually looked out the window, seeing that the carriage was heading towards the port before speaking. "That's probably because, after experiencing this maritime incident, I feel it's necessary to re-examine my life. Father, I feel that we must make changes and no longer live aimlessly like before. I want to be more actively involved in your career, contribute to you and your family, and fulfill my responsibilities as the eldest son." Shifa knew that his actions would definitely catch Bayern's attention, and when he was alone in a single room, he had already figured out the wording. "And, I plan to use this as a foundation, so that when I do things that do not conform to the original owner's personality in the future, the people around me will only feel that Western France is making changes, and will not have the idea that Western France has been replaced. Of course, these changes must be natural, soft, and gradual, so as not to arouse suspicion." "I'm glad you have such thoughts, son, you've finally grown up," said Bidsun with a relieved expression. "Don't worry, there will be a chance. Soon, you will step onto a wider stage, and I am looking forward to your performance." On the evening of the second day, Shifa returned to the town of Enki. This bay town is located in Dixie County, facing Dixie Bay and backed by the Abbey Mountains. The scenery here is pleasant, and there are always many people coming here for vacation every year. Therefore, there are many small hotels with local characteristics in Enki town. When the carriage passed by the Mermaid Road, Shifa saw a hotel with brightly lit lights, surrounded by people at the door, and police officers wearing black and white checkered uniforms appearing. It seemed that something had happened here. "Your mother must be in a hurry, but I sent a telegram back yesterday, so she shouldn't be too worried." In the carriage, his father's voice made Shifa take his gaze back from the street outside the window. The carriage quickly turned into the Golden Champagne Avenue, and stopped at a black iron gate on this street. Next to that gate, there was a sign for number 13. It was already late, but the gas streetlights on both sides of the road were exceptionally bright. The black iron gate is slowly opening, revealing the brightly lit mansion inside. This is the home of West France, a 4-story villa with over 20 rooms, including a stable, servant room, and a large garden. At this moment, the servants of the family, led by the butler, walked out and divided on both sides of the gate, waiting for the arrival of the Baron and his son. Shifa followed his father to get off the car and saw the butler Sebastian at first glance. He was a middle-aged man in his 50s, serious and humorous, with a classical face and a grey beard. Behind this butler, there are all sorts of male servants. On the other side, the leader is a woman. She is the housekeeper of the family, named Kuna. Responsible for managing the financial expenses of maids and families. This woman in her 40s has dark brown hair and deep lines that make her look very strict. Behind her, there were naturally all kinds of maids. Seeing Bison and Sifa getting off the car, led by Marion and Quina, all the servants stood in standard posture and respectfully said in unison, "Welcome back, Mr. Bison and Mr. Sifa." Bidsun gently lowered his head and entered the villa without saying a word. Shifa followed his father and entered the villa under the crowd of servants. Entering the lobby on the first floor, I heard a cheer. Dad! Brother Shifa! A 9-year-old boy with black hair and brown pupils, wearing a children's version of a tailcoat, excitedly rushed over. This is the youngest member of the family, Sifa's younger brother, Jam. He seemed to have a good relationship with Shifa, passing by his father who had already squatted down and opened his arms, and rushing straight towards his elder brother. Shifa picked him up and a surge of love surged from the bottom of his heart. How about it, our little general? Has your swordsmanship improved during my absence? Jam, who always aimed to become the kingdom general, waved his small hand and proudly said, "Of course, just yesterday, I was able to hit Mr. Shirley's hand." Mr. Shirley is a teacher hired by this family, responsible for teaching the 3 siblings of the West French in equestrian, swordsmanship, combat, and marksmanship. In addition to this teacher, the Shifa school also has an etiquette teacher, a general education teacher, and an art teacher. At this moment, a clear and teasing voice rang out in the hall. "Isn't this our big brother from West France? I thought you were already a sailor on the King of the Five Seas ship, but I didn't expect you to come back." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. 2 murder cases, seeking recommendation ticket. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. 2 murder cases, seeking recommendation ticket. Shifa easily captured the master of the voice, who was a 16-year-old girl. Her superior life made her face plump, her skin fair, delicate, and full of luster, especially her soft and shiny golden hair, as if carrying the brilliant summer sunshine, flowing with a golden luster under the light. She has bright facial features, curly eyelashes, and is dressed in a complex bright red dress, like a blooming flower. Although he spoke sarcastic words, there was a restrained concern in his blue eyes, which were like a lake under clear sky. Of course, Shifa knows who she is. This is my own sister, the treasure of the Disraeli family, Helabel. Influenced by the memory of the original owner, Shifa felt a surge of indulgence in his heart. It seemed that this young master with poor reputation had a great fondness for his younger brothers and sisters. It's just that this younger sister's words and actions are a bit inconsistent. Although she cares about her older brother, she always says harsh things. "Belle, I don't remember teaching you how to talk to your brother so impolitely." A gentle voice like a spring breeze sounded in the hall, and an elegant woman walked in. On the face that is no longer young, between the eyebrows, and in every faint pattern, there is always tolerance and warmth. Although her dress is simple, it exudes nobility when worn. Despite the arrival of summer and the gradually hot weather, she still wore long-sleeved clothing. Shifa knew that she wore long sleeves all year round because her left hand had once blocked herself from shattering and flying glass, leaving an incurable scar. If it weren't for her, not only would there be a faint tear-like scar beneath her left eye, but her entire eye would be blind. She is the mistress of this family, the mother of the 3 sisters of the West, Ainalu. "Welcome home, Shifa." Shifa felt an uncontrollable excitement, put down his younger brother, strode forward, and hugged his mother. "Good evening, Mom." He felt his eyes moist, his nose sour, and strong emotions gushing from the bottom of his heart. Even when he saw his father, he didn't have such a strong emotion. "All right, it's been a hard journey. Let's go clean up and rest early," said Ainalu, smiling and lightly patting Shifa's back. Shifa agreed and let go of his hand, taking a few steps back. Ainalu turned around and softly called out, "Matthew, come over here." A young man of the same age as Shifa walked over, dressed in the attire of a male servant. He has a darker complexion, light gray hair, and fiery red eyes. "This is your personal servant." Since he had an impure relationship with a maid, the family no longer equipped him with maids, so it was not surprising for Shifa. The servant named Matthew bowed slightly and said respectfully, "Sir, your room is ready." Shifa nodded slightly and was about to return to the room for cleaning when he heard the sound of footsteps. Then, the gray-bearded butler Sebastian hurriedly entered the room. "Sir, Director Tsausi is here." Upon hearing this name, a picture came to Shifa's mind. A middle-aged man in his 50s, with light golden hair, sparse eyebrows, dark brown pupils, a slightly overweight figure, but dignified. Despite still wearing a wedding ring, in fact, he is a widower. After his wife passed away, he remained unmarried. This is Tsausi, the director of the Enki Town Police Department. What is he doing here? Shifa thought of the police officers who frequented the hotel on Mermaid Road. He didn't stop and walked to his room while thinking. After cleaning, he changed into comfortable pajamas and opened the window. I saw the lights in my father's study below, and behind the curtains, I vaguely saw a chubby figure. The police chief stayed for a long time until Shifa fell asleep and he never left. The next day, after breakfast, the West French family rode in a carriage to St. Witt's Church, which belonged to the Church of the Night Goddess. As a family of church believers, it is normal for them to go to the church to pray after their son returns safely. After the end, Shifa did not go back with his family, but instead used walking around as an excuse to leave with his servant Matthew. They arrived at the Memorial Square, which was named in memory of the White Rose War, during which the town of Enki was burned down and only a few buildings remain to this day. This square is one of them. Of course, it has undergone some degree of renovation. Now, in addition to it, there are also the ancient city gates outside Enki town, as well as several other ancient buildings. On the square, many white doves are not afraid of humans and are chasing the feed thrown by people. In the distance, there was a group of people wearing gray and blue worker uniforms and duckbill caps, and there were also homeless people with patched clothes inside. They were listening to an old lady's speech. Shifa found an inconspicuous corner in the square and sat down. He casually took out the feed and threw it to the ground. In a moment, his feet were covered in white pigeons. Glancing at the slightly reserved young servant next to him, Shifa casually said, "Do you happen to know which young and beautiful ladies live alone in town? You can come and visit them without bringing gifts, just money." Matthew's face became a bit awkward and he coughed dryly. "Sir, it's probably not appropriate for you to engage in this kind of social interaction as soon as you've returned." "I think so too, and I'm just joking." "You don't have to look at me that way, really." Shifa smiled and shrugged. "Let's change the topic and tell me. Has anything interesting happened in town during my absence?" On his way back, he was already considering how to change his reputation and gain more support from his family. He came up with several plans, but in the end, he realized that he didn't know much about Enki town. In the original owner's memory, he had a greater impression of this town in bars, art salons, and ladies who were either bright, open, or reserved. And the final impression of this part is still profound. There was no other choice but to collect intelligence on his own. After a moment of contemplation, Matthew responded, "Sir, the town of Enki is not very big and there are not many interesting things to consider. I only thought of a few things. Not long ago, an old man named Ein suddenly bought a large number of livestock and said he wanted to start a farm, but so far there has been no further action." Shifa tried to recall, but couldn't remember who Ein was. Matthew continued, "Also, your father's farm, as well as the livestock raised by several households outside the town, have all been visited by wild wolves from the mountains. The Baron has commissioned the famous hunter in the town, Lion, to organize other hunters to enter the mountains and hunt down those wolves from unknown sources." The male servant raised his arm and pointed to the old lady who was giving a speech, her mouth foaming. "Also, Mrs. Paris recently suddenly claimed to be a relative of the night. Of course, St. Witt's Church does not recognize it, but this does not prevent the old lady from giving speeches on the square every day. The dependence of the dark night." Shifa was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but look at the old lady. The old lady has silver hair all over her head, deep legal lines, a nose like an eagle, and a gloomy face. It looks like a witch, more than any night owl. She was wearing a patched dress, holding a basket covered in a blue checkered handkerchief, unsure of what was inside. However, the most sensational thing to say is that there was a recent murder case. After a pause, Matthew exclaimed, "No, if we include the one at the Blue Fish Hotel last night, it's already 2." End of this chapter.